Today I'm going to be swatching all of my single eyeshadows from Devinah Cosmetics. I'm going to talk about the different textures that they have to offer between the different collections that they have launched. I do have these grouped by color with the exception of the iridescent shades, which will be all swatched together. And towards the end of the video, I will also swatch all of the mattes by color groups. Unfortunately, some of the shimmer shades that I'm going to be swatching are discontinued. I received some of these shadows in PR, but I did buy majority of them. I've been buying from Devinah Cosmetics for a long time, and this is not even all of their shimmer and matte shadows. They do have so many options to offer, and I do have an affiliate code with Devinah Cosmetics, which I'll put up on the screen in case you're interested in anything from them. So first, I want to talk about the different texture categories that they have to offer before we get into the swatches by color, so that when I'm referencing the textures, you have an idea on how they look in the pan as well as just on the tips of the finger. I feel like that usually helps to really show the textural differences. So this is the shade Gumballs, and I think this one has the Devinah texture. So this is the standard texture to Devinah, and by standard I mean majority of their shadows are this texture that are part of the more special multi-chrome dual chrome shadows and not their regular metallic shimmer shadows. I don't have too many of those. Their standard texture is very smooth but very sparkly at the same time, and it does almost seem like it has a slightly larger particle texture, and it does, especially compared to some of the other shades. But I would say it's easy to use, and I would recommend a tacky primer, especially if you have hooded lids and or you generally seem to have fallout problems. This shade is So Lace, and this is a good representation of their satin texture. So you can see definitely a lot less sparkle, and it looks very smooth and almost kind of flat in the pan. You don't really see a high shine. You don't really see like particles in here, or they're reflecting off of each other or something like that. With some larger flaky shadows especially, you can kind of see them almost in the pan reflecting off of each other. So this is a very smooth, and I do think they have kind of an in-between this one and their standard. For that example, I would say Silent Blizzard, which is a newer shadow, is a good example. I feel like this is very much between the standard and the satin, so it has like a little bit more oomph than the satin, but it's not quite as sparkly as the standard formula. The other smooth formula are the Aurora Flares, which are their black base multi-chromes, and these are very smooth, shifty, and metallic. They're not necessarily sparkly, and I do think some of the shades in the Aurora Flares are more shiny than others. Here's Puffles, and this one is ever so slightly more textured and almost a little bit more piecey in the pan than their standard formula, and it is a little bit more crumbly in the pan as well. But keeping in mind that some of these shadows I have had for quite a few years now, so that could also be part of it. But in general, I do remember some of their textures, specifically in the collection that Puffles is from, that it does have a bit of a larger particle size overall. And Echidna is another example of a totally different texture to them. I feel like this is a newer texture to Devinah. In terms of when this launched, I felt like this felt different, but I have only experienced it with this collection that this shade is from, which I'll put up on the screen. I don't remember it off the top of my head right now, but this shade is a little bit more textured, a little bit more flaky, but not in a dry way. It actually feels almost a little bit slick, but not being emollient or squishy, but it definitely has, like, it does feel a little bit more bindery compared to their standard formula as well as the other textured formulas and their smooth formulas, which those all feel dry. So this one does feel a little bit more extra, just not as dry. Moonbeam is from the Moonscapes collection, and in general these are also all the same kind of texture that was relatively different to Devinah Cosmetics at the time that it came out. It is a bit more of a textured formula. It almost has a little bit of grittiness to it, so it does feel a little bit different from the formula I just talked about in terms of texture, but they do look a little bit more similar in the pan because they do have a similar particle size. And I wanted to mention Moonlit because I haven't experienced any shadows that are like this one. I feel like this shade is a bit of a standout from their different textures. It's ultra fine, sparkly, really sparkly, very smooth. It doesn't necessarily feel like really dry, but it also doesn't feel creamy, and it's just the only shade that is like this. It's just something about the pigment of this shadow that is different from the rest of their other shadows, and I would love to see more like this in this texture. I mean, look at that sparkle, but it's also metallic at the same time. It is so beautiful, and I think this is only $8. So here's a look at how each of these shades pick up. So again, this is Soul Lace, this is the satin formula, this is Gumballs, which is the more standard shimmer formula, which is actually very similar to the Way Silent Blizzard swatches, so I'm not going to be swatching that one separately with these shades because they're almost identical. And then Australis, and then Moonlit, which is the kind of outlier a little bit. So you can see how this one has just a little bit more of a larger particle size, so does this one. And the satin shade is almost like powdery, but a very fine mica. And Australis just looks like a very uniform. And the other three textures, this is Puffles, Echidna, and Moonbeam. So you can see a bit more of a texture. These types of textures definitely pick up very easily. You can very easily pick up too much of these. And if you put too much on, especially over a tacky primer, they will probably accentuate skin texture. Starting off with the yellows, here is Silent Blizzard, Gumballs, Pancake Bubbles, Butter Pucker. And these all have a slightly more textured feel to them. I would say these are more of the standard formula, if not maybe just a slightly larger particle size than their standard formula. And they are very reflective and they have quite a bit of a sparkle to them. So I'm going to be swatching these kind of like 4 or 5 at a time. And then I'm going to swatch them all out on my arm, but there won't be any voiceover for that. Unfortunately, I just can't individually swatch all of these on the back of my hand. It's just not realistic. I do think the first two shades are quite similar. Very, very similar, actually. I think this shade is actually a little bit more gold, maybe, and this one is a lot more sheer. But these are all quite similar. I think even in the shift, they're a little bit similar, with the exception of the bottom two shades. Next three shades are Polar Eclipse, Vela, and Fairy Fire. So Fairy Fire is a little bit of an outlier because I feel like this one's extremely beautifully smooth, very fine pigment, looks very, very shiny, but I feel like once I put it on the lid, it is not as shiny. And then Polar Ice is a little bit more of a satin, while Vela is more of the standard Devinah formula. I like never swatch on this hand, so bear with me. I need to get used to it because it'd be really nice if I could just use both hands to swatch. And Fairy Fire is so shifty, and it has quite a bit of a translucent base. Look at that bright yellow shift. I love that. It's such an interesting shade to have a light pink straight on with a yellow shift. Next, moving on to the oranges. Starlit Snow, Frothy Surf. This one's a little bit more pinky, but it's kind of flashing orange. Luna Storm, and then more of a true orange, Scylla. Starlit Snow picked up a little bit more powdery than Frothy Surf. Out of these four shades, Luna Storm is the smoothest. This orange is the flakiest. It has that formula from that collection that's just ever so slightly more creamy. I do feel like these two are pretty similar. But Frothy Surf is definitely more orange and more opaque. Yeah, this one probably should have went with the pinks. But I don't know, I was like, it's looking a little peachy orangey. And then the shade's got a little bit of translucency to it. So you can really see the difference between the first two shades once they're swatched out, because I do think in the pan they look very similar, and even just like on the fingertip. But you can see the very strong base in Frothy Surf. Next set of four, Lynx, Sunset Sands, Centaurus, and Sweetie Sunbeam. These all have the Devinah standard formula, so they're sparkly, a little bit more piecey, but very smooth. These two shades do look a bit similar. We'll see how those swatch out. Let's see if I can get really good at swatching on this hand by the time I finish all these swatches. Okay, so this one's definitely brighter, and again, a little bit more orangey. And then Centaurus is completely different, very opaque. I feel like Centaurus is maybe a little bit less sparkly. And then Sweetie Sunbeam, I'm going to add another layer So Lynx is a lighter gold with a lighter orange base. I think Centaurus almost doesn't belong in here. I do think Centaurus is just ever so slightly more like pinky. It's fun, kind of neutral because it is very dimensional. And Sweetie Sunbeam has a reddish brown base to it with the gold sparkles kind of sitting and flashing straight on. The next set are the pinky peaches, and then after that I have some other pinks, like slightly different tones. Pixie Sticks, Soleil's, Verdant Frost, and Sour Spanx. So Sour Spanx is the most textured out of all of these, and the rest of these are the satin formula. And I think actually the first shade's a little bit more powdery on the pickup as well. You can kind of see the extra that I just picked up versus these other two shades. And these are just super, super smooth. They're a little bit on, well, with the exception of this one, but that first shade has a little bit of a lighter base to it. And then you'll definitely see the difference between how this one's swatches look much more sparkly, especially kind of like on an angle. Soleil's has a beautiful, super bright pink shift straight on, while Verdant Frost, it's a little bit more of a baby pink that leans peach. And Pixie Sticks is like a peachy gold. And Sour Spanx has almost a little bit of a taupey base to it with a really pale yellow gold reflex straight on, but it looks very dimensional. Sweet Slush, Fire Gaze, Nerites, and Tucana, and I will be swatching a fifth one after this. So there's definitely more texture going on here. For reference, I think Tucana is the closest to the standard Devinah formula, and some of these others have a little bit more of a texture to them, but they do completely smooth out and have that sparkle. And Nerites has that slightly slicker texture to it. My hand is so dry already. Can't even imagine what it's going to be after I finish everything. This one is definitely most opaque, and it just spreads a little bit kind of like thicker to the touch versus dry. Love Tucana. It's a beautiful baby pink with an orangey peach shift in it. Such a beautiful everyday kind of shadow. Leaning Sweet Slush is leaning a little bit purple straight on, but it has quite a bit of a transparent base to it, and it shifts to a pale yellow. And then the last shade from this set is Amphitrite. And this one's so punchy. So you can see it has a little bit more of a larger particle size. And this one was a little bit slicker from what I remember when I first got it, but I do feel like it doesn't feel as slick now. It feels a little bit drier. So it has a larger, more flaky size almost, but it is very sparkly, very beautiful. It has a pinkish base and it shifts aqua to green and blue maybe a little bit too. It's ultra shifty kind of shade. Next up are the purple, pink, blue shifting shades. So Marshmallow Pillows, Green Puff Cuddles, and Thusa. Thusa is one of my favorites. And this one has a slightly larger particle size, but it does have a little bit more of that creamy touch to it, which is why it looks so smooth already on the finger. And then these two shades have the standard Devinah formula. So this one is a little bit more of a satin, a little bit more translucent as well. This one is more opaque, very heavily pink. And then Thusa is just so beautiful. I feel like Thusa is almost Fairy Fire, but with a more opaque kind of orangey base, shifting to purple with a greenish flash straight on. I think I see aqua in there as well. And here's the other four shades. There's going to be a fifth one. And Salvatore is the only one that's not like a shifty shade. I did recently get this one. I was so excited. It is for sure a bit more of a truer red, but kind of like a slightly darker red. Here's Cygnus, Magellantic, Australis, and Salvatore. So Australis is very smooth, and these two are the standard Devinah formula. And then Salvatore, I would say, is a bit more of a satin, not as shiny as you can see as some of the other shades. I do feel like some of these look a little bit similar with like slight differences, especially in like opacity and base. This one's definitely got a little bit more purpliness going on. And then of course the black base multi-chrome. I'm gonna add another layer to that one. And then Salvatore is gonna really just stand out because it is so vibrant. I added another layer to Salvatore so you could see the opacity. I feel like it looks a little bit lighter now that I've swatched it out than in the pan. It seems like it's a little bit of a darker red. I think the main difference between these two shades is that this one's a little bit more pinky leaning purpley. And I did repurchase the Galaxy Dust Shifters because the last time I bought them because I had them from launch and I was curious to see if there was any difference. And I do think that there is a little bit of a difference between the originals and the newer ones. Specifically in terms of these two shades, I feel like they look more similar with the new set. And also they almost are a little bit kind of, the pigment isn't like fully evenly dispersed. It looks like it's almost a little bit more patchy. I would definitely use these over a tacky primer. And then Australis, it's a plummy purple, maybe ever so slightly pink, shifting to gold, green, like a lime green. And the last shade in this set I'm going to add is Blood Moon, and this one is a new shade, and this one is very smooth. I feel like it's not quite a satin. It's got maybe a little bit more shine than a satin, but it's also not the standard Devinah formula in terms of sparkle. And it does look like it has a black base, so you can see the two reds kind of together. See the difference? And then the shift in Blood Moon, of course. Next, moving on to the iridescence, I'm going to swatch the Halo Moon collection first because all of these shades, with the exception of Nokomis, are all discontinued. So I thought I would just have these all together. I believe I have a dedicated video on this collection. Zira, Aylin, Marama, and Esmeralda. And these did have varying textures to them. So Aylin was quite smooth, and Marama, while it has a larger particle size, it's very smooth still. And Esmeralda definitely is a bit more textured, and so is the first shade. And that one's also a little bit more opaque, I can see. This one also reminds me a little bit of Fairy Fire, but much more of a iridescent than the other shade, than Fairy Fire. And the last shade is definitely more of a satin finish, especially compared, and so is the first shade. I think these two shades are kind of the most metallic. The other two shades in this collection are Nokomis, which is the only one you can still buy, and Proteus, which has a larger particle size. Very smooth, a little bit more sheen-like. And then especially compared to this one, it's a little bit chunky. Definitely would recommend a glitter primer with that one. But it is very shiny, very metallic. And it does smooth out, but you can definitely still see the particle size. This is a shade that you don't want to pick up too much of. And these are the other iridescent shades, and I believe these are all available. Bubble Fizz, Puffles, Taffy Bomb, Cavity. And these all have a slightly larger particle size. They do smooth out. This one almost feels a little bit gritty. And this one definitely picks up a little bit heavier. Generally speaking, all of these, while they're very sparkly, definitely recommend a tacky primer with all of these. I mean, look at that shine. So much shine and sparkle. I feel like these are a little bit more of duochromes, while the Halo Horizon were more of a true multi-chrome, like there was more shifts going on. Soda Swamp, Yumlicks, Boom Sour, and Shuggies, and there's one more after this. These all have a larger particle size, but they're very sparkly and shiny. This one feels also just maybe a little bit, like you can feel the texture of the shadow a little bit, but not in an irritating way. at all. And this shade right here is a little bit more smoother. I feel like maybe a little bit less sparkly. And this one also as well, a little bit. That one's more of like a bright green, while the one above it is an aqua. And then the one above that is more of a purple. And the last shade is Cake Bomb, and this one's pretty smooth while being shiny. Next up is the Moonscapes collection. These are all the larger, flakier size. Fire Hunt, Air Glow, Lucent Ray, Moonbeam. Very ultra sparkly and opaque as well. Some of these do stain a little bit. The ones that have, I believe it's the shade I haven't swatched, it has a little bit of a pink base to it. And I will be swatching these all together. So it's going to go down my arm a little bit. Earth Shine, Pink Flare, Moonlit, Mystic Moon Pie. Moonlit is very smooth, and Mystic Moon Pie is a standard Devinah formula. And you'll definitely see that once they're all kind of together. So you do have to kind of work a little bit to kind of spread it out. Here's what this shade looks like once it's kind of deposited down, to give you a better idea of the texture, hopefully. And then Moonlit, you can see how smooth but very sparkly it is. And then Mystic Moon Pie. I feel like it's pretty smooth, but it does feel and just seem like it's a different kind of particle from Moonlit. And here's all the shadows together. Ultra, ultra metallic. Definitely recommend a tacky primer. And making sure you use only a little bit. I do prefer to use my fingers with shadows that are overly textured because they tend to be harder to pick up with any brush. And also they are a bit more messy to put down with a brush if it does pick it up. Onto the greens. Half Sea Fog, Starborn, Echidna, Orion. Echidna is the flakiest, and the other shades are the more standard Devinah formula. So smooth, sparkly, kind of piecey. These two shades are a little bit similar. And I swatched that way too far down. I'm going to add another layer of Orion. Also adding Offshore Mist, and that one is also the Devinah standard shimmer formula. So sparkly. Out of all of these two shades are the most similar. I think the main difference is the tone is slightly different straight on. So Half Sea Fog is a little bit more pink straight on, and also the base is a little bit stronger. But let me actually build it up just to see. I added another layer to both of these to really show the difference between the bases because they are very, very similar, kind of straight on. And the shift is more or less almost the same, slightly varied, but they do look very, very similar straight on. I love how shifty this one is. It's not really a green shade. It has a lot of green in the shift, which is I think what you see in the pan, which is why I categorize it here. But it is more of a pinky shadow, so pink straight on with a green, really strong green shift. I would say these two shades are more like maybe a subtle duochrome. 4 shades are basically your green, brown base shades. So Rainbow Blossom, which I think this one's a bit more of a duochrome, Cinder Bloom, Asteria, and Celesta, which these two are part of a collection. And these are the Devinah Shimmer Shadow formula. So you should be able to really see the differences in terms of the bases on these. So this one has an almost lighter orangey base to it with a green reflex straight on. This one has a very warm brown base in it, a little bit stronger, a bit more opaque with a magenta shift. And then this shade down here, it actually looks very, very kind of like orangey gold. doesn't really, compared to the other shades, doesn't really have a, I mean, I guess it kind of has a brown base to it, but these are super sparkly. A little bit, just a little bit more textured, a little bit more piecey. And the last 4 green shades, these two are not necessarily really that green, but they're definitely olive leaning. And these are all part of the same collection. So these are the black base multi-chromes. So Chromosphere, Phenomenon, Hemisphere, and Exosphere. I believe Exosphere is the only one still available. I believe Chromosphere got discontinued pretty quickly, and these are all very, very metallic and smooth. With the black base. So yeah, these are a little bit more bronzy, but in the shift they have green. I'm gonna add another layer to this one, and then Exosphere. Also going to add another layer to Exosphere. So this one is very olive toned, while this one's a little less olive toned and a little bit more of a brassy gold. And a little bit less of an obvious shift, while this one has a pretty strong, obvious, really forest green type of shift. And then this shade also has a forest green shift. This one has a bit more of a muted olive green tone, very like army green. And then this is more of a vibrant green with a shift to blue. So some similar shifts, but also some differences in the shifts. Next up are the purples. Rents, Frostbane, Mystic Frost, and Thetis. Thetis is the shiniest and the more textured shade from the more textured collection. And these 3 are pretty much more or less satins, with the exception of this one is maybe a little bit shinier, but just a little bit. And this shade is quite opaque. The shade is super interesting because it has a purple base to it, but it has a minty reflect. Really nice shifting shade. I wish it was a little bit more sparkly. This one is blue with a purpley shift, and then this one is pink with a little bit of almost slightly like a greenish base to it. Ever so slightly, just a hint. And then this one is like a taupey purple plum shifting to aqua and with a light gold, slightly leaning, maybe a little bit orangey reflect straight on. Kazookles, Sprinkle Whips, Storm Rider, and Galen. And there's going to be a 5th shade. So these are all pretty sparkly, with this one being just a smaller particle size out of these shades. And you can kind of see the way it picks up. It just doesn't pick up as kind of like this one and this one, where it has just like a little bit of oomph to it. Realize I picked those up with my other hand that I wanted. So these are all very smooth. They just have that PC formula. I would say this one is the smoothest with less sparkle, less smaller particle size. Again, you can especially, and also more opaque, especially out of all of these shades. These 2 shades are definitely a little bit similar, but this one has a little bit more pink, while this one is leaning more violet. Not just in the shift, but in the tone straight on. And this one's a little bit more of like a aqua blue purple. The next 4 shades are quite smooth. Maybe this one's just a little bit more PC. So there's Nocturne Ash, Starfire, Midnight Nova, and Winter Moon. This one's a bit opaque. This one has a reddish brown, mostly reddish base to it. This one has more of a teal base with a purple reflect. And then this one's kind of similar to Thetis, but it's definitely less flaky and more smooth and less sparkly. So it's got like that taupey purpley base with a gold reflect. Let me swatch Thetis underneath it so you can get an idea. Yeah, it's more or less the same. Pretty much the same with more shift in Thetis, but it is also more shiny. Adding another layer to Starfire, I find that the newer versions I got of these shades, you really heavily see the base and not necessarily the reflect in them. I just feel like they're not the same as they were before, and also in their swatches they look much more like you can see the color versus the base, but I feel like I can really just heavily see the base. And then the darkest purples, Calypso Shadows and Ritual. These are the Devinah Standard Shimmer Formula. I'm going to add another layer to Ritual. See a little bit of a shift in Calypso Shadows for sure, but not really in Ritual. Ritual does have a black base, but it does have that more sparkly texture versus smooth metallic like some of their other black base multichromes. Moving on to the blue slash kind of aqua, Water Mist, Nerds, Twinkle Toots, Everlasting Gobstoppers, and Everlasting Gobstoppers. This shade is definitely the smoothest. It is more satin. These two have a little bit larger particle size and are going to be a little bit more sparkly, especially this one. And then this one is kind of like an in-between those two shades. These are swatching super smooth. This one has like a little bit more of an oomph to it. You can see the sparkle is a bit more prominent. And then this shade is a little bit softer. I'm going to add another layer to that one. And then here's Swudge, which I'm going to add here as well. This one is a bit more, this one is a little bit more powdery and sheer. Adding another layer. Together, this shade is actually quite green flashing straight on, which is really interesting because I do see that reddish purpley shift in the pan especially, but it has quite a bit of a sheen to it, but definitely more satin. This one is the most sparkly one out of them all, but also doesn't really have a shift. And then this one has like a light teal base with a gold reflect straight on. This one's more of a true blue, while this one's a little bit more of a turquoise. Pale Lemon, Confetti Kisses, Altair, and Aqua Abyss. So this one has a larger particle size. It does pick up a little bit heavier. It has a less dry texture, feeling a little bit more almost creamy without being actually creamy. These three I would say are the standard Devinah texture. Okay, I feel like I'm finally getting better at this swatching on this hand. Oh, this one is super kind of almost vibrant neon green. And then such a shift in the first shade. Quite a bit of sparkle with this one, and then a little bit less with that one. Next 4 shades. I don't know why I put this one here because it's not really blue. It's actually maybe a little bit more green leaning, but it is what it is. So Amber Rain, Messier, Skyla, and Frozen Waves. And these are all the Devinah standard formula. So these are going to be very smooth but sparkly. Oh yeah. So this one has a much heavier brownish, reddish leaning base. I actually feel like this one is reflecting a little bit more green. So you can really see the differences between kind of the main color straight on versus the base. They definitely have a similar base. I think the shift in this one is very magenta, so it's kind of making it seem like the base a little bit more magenta leaning. This one has kind of like a almost yellowy orange base. It's still pretty light though. And this one shifts purple with a light yellow reflect. Here are the more green leading blue shades, Swirling Waters, Akia, Draco, and I'm adding Midnight Sun in this one because I don't know where else to put it. So it just turns out that I have 3 shades of this left, so I thought I would tag this one on here. And these 3 feel like the Devinah Standard Shimmer texture, and then this one is more of a satin. It definitely has the shift in there, but you'll see it's pretty subdued. It's not very metallic. I do think the other black-based multi-chromes are more metallic, but I have had a bunch of shades. Onto the darker blues, so Zombie, 347, Seaside Horizon, and Seance. These are all the Devinah Standard Shimmer texture. So they have just that sparkle. These are all going to be pretty opaque. This one has a little bit of a darker base to it, so does this one. I think some of these are definitely in the same collection. So just a little bit of shifting going on, but these do have that Devinah sparkle. So this one out of all 3 of these doesn't seem to have a black base to it. And then this one is more of a like denim blue straight on, shifting to dark purple, though I do see that this bottom shade also shifts to dark purple, but it is more of a truer dark blue. And this one shifts like a lighter purple, probably also because it doesn't have a black base to it. And the last 4 shades for the shimmer shadows are Thermosphere, Magnetosphere, Polaris, and Borealis. And these are all black-based multi-chromes, so they're very smooth and more of like a uniform shine, but not necessarily a sparkle. Going to add another layer to some of these. I'm trying to make sure I'm using the correct finger for the swatch that I already did. This shade is like a cobalt blue shifting to magenta purple, while this one is leaning a little bit more of a denim blue. And then this is a vibrant green, grassy green, and this one is more subdued and shifting to vibrant blue instead of vibrant purple. Next up are arm swatches of the mattes that I have, and these are by color. I'm not going to get into detail of the different tones. I think you can see the differences and the nuances and the depth between all the different shades. I think it's a really nice variety, and definitely Devinah is kind of known for having a lot more grungier type of mattes, a little bit more unique type of tones. Also have some beautiful mustards and also olive greens. In terms of formula, I do find that they vary just a little bit between colors, which probably has to do with the color the most. So some of them are a little bit harder pressed and some of them are a little bit looser pressed. Generally overall, most of them have a little bit more kick up. So those are all the swatches of my entire Devinah collection. Let's talk about my top 12 shades. These are just my favorites, the first ones to come to mind when I think of Devinah. There's some OGs in here and one newer shade. So getting into the OGs, we have Tucana. Of course, this is such a beautiful semi-sheer pink, peach, everyday type of shade with a little bit of extra sparkle in it. Then a Sour Sphinx, which is also an amazing everyday one and done shadow. Throw a matte in the crease and put this all over the lid, and it has tons of sparkle. Next shade is Thusa. I mean, this one is just next level. Super glowy, really vibrant, really just interesting kind of color combination. I love this one so much, all over the lid. Really fun shade to layer as well. And then we have Fairy Fire, also a staple Devinah shadow. It's ultra shifty, even though it looks so yellow in the pan, and it's another great one to layer over different colorful mattes to get a different effect. Next shade is Echidna. This one is super punchy and I love the shifts in this one. It's got the vibrancy, it's got the shine, and this one you can make a little bit more opaque. Then Half Sea Fog. I mean, I love any sort of grungy green base with a pink reflect. And this one has the beautiful Devinah formula with the sparkle, but the smoothness, but also a little bit of pieciness. Bubble Fizz is a great one and done shadow, also a layering type of shadow. It's an iridescent, but it's a little bit more neutral, which makes it super versatile, especially over different tones of brown mattes as well as an inner corner highlight. The newest shade in here is Ember Rain, and this one is from their most recent collection, late 2024. And the moment I saw this one and the moment I swatched it, I knew it was going to be one of my favorites. It is such a beautiful, very versatile shade with a soft brown base and a green reflect. And this one is another one that's just super fun to layer and to use as a one and done shadow, a little bit more of a wet look as well. Of course, we have Messier, which this one, there's no way I could not mention this one. Love this one so much. Just a really beautiful, smooth, shiny, reflective, wet look eyeshadow. Really fun every day with a little bit more of a punch. Next is Cake Bomb. This is an iridescent, a little bit more of a duochrome. It has a greenish bluish reflect, but it's a little bit more soft, and this one is great for all over the lid. And the texture of this one is just so sublime and beautiful to use. This is a beautiful, spicy, neutral, everyday type of shadow. One and done. Throw a matte in the crease or matte in the outer corner. Use this all over the lid. It has a stunning texture where it has a little bit of sparkle, but it's extremely smooth, really easy to use, and it just checks off all the boxes for me. So these are my top 12 Devinah eyeshadow recommendations. Let me know in the comments below if you have any of these. Also, let me know in the comments below which are your favorite Devinah eyeshadows. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed the video and you found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.